Approach the chapter is to read through the chapter once, paying particular paying particular attention to the examples. And then after you do that, I would encourage to learn the vocabulary in every chapter. This will be on each test and matching form. And then before you do the exercises that I will cover, I strongly encourage you to do the self-tutorial exercises in the back of Wheelock's Latin. So here we have the exercises for chapter 10, and you also have the answers or an answer key for these in the back of the book. So we're not going to go over these because you have the answers, but I would strongly urge you and encourage you to do these self-tutorial exercises before you tackle the exercises that I am covering. So with that said, let's take a look at the topic in this chapter. This is fourth conjugation. Fourth conjugation, we're talking about verbs. Don't forget that verbs have conjugations and nouns have declensions. So this is an important distinction to keep in mind. As your book points out, again, you'll want to read this on your own. If we were having a class in person, we would read this together in class, but I trust you can read this on your own. By fourth conjugation, we are talking about verbs that end in I-R-E. And you can see some examples here versus first conjugation is A-R-E, second conjugation is E-R-E with the macron or the accent mark. Third conjugation is E-R-E without the macron or the accent mark, and here we have fourth conjugation with I-R-E. We also have the so-called capio, facio, third conjugation verbs, which are also indicated here. These will need to be memorized, but again, since we do not do hardly any English into Latin, in one sense, you just need to be able to recognize the form of that word, in this case verbs, in order to translate it effectively. Because, as you can see, one of the keys is noting the key vowel as part of the vocabulary. But again, it will be given to you in the readings. And so it's just mainly recognizing the conjugation of the verb, and in particular, the conjugation ending, the verb conjugation, osmos tisnit, so ago, I, agis, you, agit, he, she, it, agimos, we, agitis, you all, agunt, they. And you can see this osmos tisnit, which I will be referring to on a regular basis, goes back to the first, second, and third conjugation. So take a look at this. Don't forget that you might want to do a review of first, second, third conjugation. Just nowadays, of course, there's all kinds of content on YouTube. And so just Googling Latin verb conjugations, I'm sure you'll get a nice video which gives an overview and a review of this. I highly recommend latintutorial.com as a nice video series for this purpose. But again, since we're doing this in this format, I think I'm going to trust that you can review this on your own, and as always, email me if you have any questions. Here is our vocabulary. Again, please take a look at that. As I mentioned, I'm using a Kindle version, so some of the vowels in particular, it looks like the font and point is a little bit funky, but that's just because of the Kindle version. Your book should have its regular forms. All right, I'm going to jump right into the exercises for you. So as a rule, we will focus on the Sententiae Antiquae and the longer passage, in this case, the Incomparable Value of Friendship by Cicero. So let's take a look at this first one here. Again, I do encourage you to read it aloud. Unos cupiditatem pecuniae gloriaeque fugite by Cicero. And Cicero, again, 106 to 43 BC, very famous Roman writer. I mentioned before, it is from his writings that we have the most information about ancient Rome. So here we have cupiditatem pecuniaeque gloriaeque fugite. So, fugiti. So you probably want to, when I was learning Latin, I still do this. We need to make sure we understand the words. I did bring up the Whitaker's words for us here. So this is a good online site. Some of these words have been used before, but you can see this means enthusiasm, eager, passion, desire, lust, greed. This is one of the challenges with Latin, is Latin doesn't have the vocabulary that English has, and so only the context will tell you what the word means and the best way to translate it. For our purposes, namely Latin 102 at Campbell University in the 21st century, in most cases, any of these words will work, although arguably there's better choices stylistically given a particular author. But again, I think that goes beyond what we're trying to achieve, namely improve your literacy, your analytical skills, your capacity to learn, which, let's be honest, that's one thing that the value of a university degree demonstrates to potential employers, that you're able to learn and able to stick with something, and those kinds of skills translate into what's called work ethic. At any rate, that's neither here nor there, but you'll definitely want to use this as a source. So notice it ends in em, and even here on the Whitaker's words, it tells us it's accusative, but if we look here, we see third declension accusative singular ending in em. So it tells us it is the direct object. So desire, money, gloria, flee. So I'm going to go ahead and write down my translation. Here we have the second person plural imperative going all the way back to chapter 1, the verb at the end. So flee, desire for money and glory. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up here. I thought I had, okay, here we go. So flee, desire for money and glory. Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, remember, Cicero is writing during the collapse of the Republic, and if people are just greedy and interested in power, clearly that's contrary to liberty and virtue as Cicero understood it, and so that is the context for that. So fugite, flee, desire, cupiditatem, like Cupid, and then you desire for something. So here's ae, pecuniae gloriaeque. And so we look at our endings here. This is first declension, dative singular. So there's our pecuniae gloriaeque, and we put all together is flee, a desire for money and glory. So if you want to say a desire, that's fine too. So it really doesn't, we're not going to get into debates of style in this online format. All right, so that one's pretty straightforward, although it does remind us that if, remember, the dative is to or for whom something is done. So if we use the preposition for, we're going to need the dative. So again, pecuniaeque, gloriaeque. And then we mentioned earlier that Cupid, or desire in this case, is in the accusative, making it the direct object, because the verb in the second person plural imperative is fugite. Okay, Terence, a comic writer, although sometimes some of his humor doesn't come across in these brief sentences. Faciam is actually future tense, so you're at a point now where, like in the sciences, you're probably going to have to look up words if you don't know. But this one doesn't tell us. Actually, we don't have a context of this one, but we haven't had the subjunctive yet. So just based on that, it is being used in the future tense. So this is one of our IO words, because the book hasn't introduced subjunctive yet. So the author, Wheelox, definitely wants us to use faciam, or future active indicative, for this. So what do we have here is that I will do my duty. So I got too many tabs open in one sentence. So let's see. I will do my duty. think I'm going to close this one here. So I will do, faciam, that's future tense. That's one of the new verb forms in the chapter. My duty, that's fairly straightforward because second declension accusative singular is so that makes it its direct object. As you know, duty was very important for the Romans, was right up there with virtue and piety. Okay, if you want to say I shall do my duty, that would work too. So, tres, let's take a look at number 3 here. Fama tua et vita filiae tuae in periculum cres venient. Now this one's a little bit tricky. We're getting to the point now where you and I sometimes have to look up words. In fact, not sometimes, a lot of times. Because we need to make sure that now that we have the present tense, the past tense, and the future tense, if we make mistakes in the tenses, you would lose points on the test for the wrong tense. So this one is future tense. But again, this is it took me a while to be able to recognize future tense when I was learning Latin way back when, at this level, that is to say. So when in doubt, like in anything else, take your time and look it up. But you can see this is future. So actually both of these, as you know, the Whitaker's words gives us a lot of information, but it doesn't really give us context. But in this case, it is future tense. Again, take a look at the endings in the beginning of the chapter that describes this E as the key vowel indicating future. But then we have NT, which means they. So that is the third person plural of our osmos tisnit. So kres is where we get words like procrastinate. So kres is an adverb, it means tomorrow. So again, you probably want to do something like this. Fame, your, and life of daughter, you're in danger, tomorrow will come. Fama could mean rumor as well. So it's another one where only the context, and that one of the maybe disadvantages of the wheel locks, it doesn't give us a whole lot of context. So it could be rumor, reputation, fame, ill repute. I generally go with rumor, although sometimes it loses a little bit in translation, but it's just easier to use the wheel locks if we adopt rumor as our standard translation for this. But it could be reputation too. As you know, shaming your father or your parents in ancient Rome was punishable by death. Not that Roman parents did it, but the authority of the parents. Rome was not a culture for children in the sense that it was a culture of Caesars and a culture of virtue and a culture of manliness, which is why the Romans conquered so much of the known world. All right, so we go back to the actual example is tomorrow. Your fame or your reputation and the life of your daughter will fall into danger. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out here and then try to explain it in greater detail. So if I can type here. So tomorrow, Grace, your reputation, here I'm contradicting myself, and the life of your daughter will come into danger. Now, probably in English we would say will be in danger, but we have venient here as the verb, and so we're going to have to follow this and be a little bit literal. So tomorrow, Cres, your reputation and the life of your daughter. So let's take a look at that for a second. Filii is AE, so that's genitive. Again, only the context will tell us, is it of or for or to? So in this case, the context tells us it's of. And so we have to be a little bit discriminating in our lessons here. And then will fall, that's future tense. And then into danger, where it's like perishable or perish. This one's a little bit tricky. Number two is pretty easy once we know the future tense, but this one probably is a little bit tricky, especially after the hiatus or break from Latin the past few weeks. So, like so much else, things probably just have to be memorized. Again, I tell my younger students, if one is a brain surgeon, one cannot look on YouTube for how to make that procedure or do that procedure. Like in sport, it's muscle memory. You got to have it within you in order to know it. So just memorize these is probably the best way to go. But we had a harder one. Grammatically, this one is fairly easier here by Marshall, who often was a satirist like Juvenal. Life is not to live, but to be well. So let me put that up here. It's a nice one here, a nice motto. So life is not to live, but to live well. Does this remind you of any other famous sayings by Romans and in Latin? Well, perhaps carpe diem, seize the day. It's not how long we live; it's how well we live. Life is long enough, as Mark Aurelius pointed out in his Meditations. If we live a meaningful life, of taking every opportunity. So life is not to live, but to be well. Could also mean to fare well. So it's one of those things where, again, just taking a little bit of time. So even here they have maybe to be healthy, but I think that kind of misses it. I think it means like more of happiness, and so I'm going to say farewell. Certainly, he's not talking about power in terms of political power. So this one loses a little bit, perhaps. So I'm going to stick with my translation. But if you want to experiment with other ones, that's fine. So life is not to live, but to live well. Taking a look at the grammar, vita, that's fairly straightforward. First declension, nominative singular, vita. Non est is not to, but then we have the vivere, the infinitive, going back to last semester. Sed means but, and then so we have two infinitives, vivere, valere. Notice that vivere does not have a macron over the second to last e, which tells us it is third conjugation, whereas this one does have an e over the macron, which tells us it's second conjugation. And again, your book points this out in the beginning of this chapter. Quinque, semper magno cum timere incipio dicere. So here's the great Roman statesman, rhetorician Cicero. Even he got nervous, apparently, speaking before large crowds. So once again, you probably are going to have something like this. Always great with fear, I begin to speak. So, but then we have to sort of, manipulate it and play around with the language so that we can make sense of the grammar and the translation. So because incipio's I always begin to speak with great fear. So I always begin to speak with great fear. So I, incipio, because it ends in O, that's a verb, and then always, semper, like Semperfi, the bumper sticker. I always begin, because that's the meaning of the verb, to speak. There's our infinitive, our verbal complement. And then here we have with great fear. Notice that cum, and this is one of your vocab words actually, is always followed by the ablative. So cum with the ablative. So sure enough, we have magno timere, because magno is second declension ablative singular, and timere is third declension ablative singular, because these are objects of cum, which must be in the ablative. So here's a good example where reading the chapter before you watch this or do this, studying the vocab, doing the self-tutorial exercises, it's going to make this a lot easier. Otherwise, it might seem like I'm going through these too fast. Well, that's just because you need to go back and do a little bit of preparatory work to get to this. So this is generally a later activity in each chapter. Number 6. Si me duces musa coronam magna cum laude capiam. This is by Lucretius. Here we have the Muses, the daughters of Zeus and Semele, in charge of the arts and sciences. Again, a little bit tricky in terms of, so again, what makes most of these tricky, among other things, is you're going to have to look up the words. Otherwise, you're just kind of guessing or just not understanding it. So if me you lead, Muse, crown big with praise, I begin. So that's kind of literally looking up the words, but then we got to go back and make sense of it. Now, duces, which we've had before, duco, ducere, duxi, ducum, but what is new for us in this is it is future active indicative second person singular. So if you will lead me is how we have to practice that one. So this chapter is really going to require paying close attention to the verb tenses. Otherwise, it's very easy to, one, make a mistake, but if you put the verb in the wrong tense, the rest of the sentence might not be as clear as it needs to be. In other words, it might not make any sense. So if you will lead me, in other words, as a source of inspiration, if you will lead me. If you will lead me, so if you, S, will, E, lead, duke, me. So Latin just has one word, English has three, will, lead. Actually, two words, I guess, right? So muse, so we just say muse. I will begin, or in this case, I will take a crown with great praise. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so we might have to look up capiam. I will put on. Let's go put on for this one here, because you put a crown on your head. So I will, so it's future tense, I will put on a crown with great praise. I will put on a crown with great praise. Now, a lot of times in the Wheelock's Latin, sometimes this seems a little bit abstract, but it's just the nature of the book. It gives you like very short sentences, and so we don't have a larger context. So sometimes it loses the flow of the words that come before it or after it. And so, but yeah, I think we can be comfortable with these translations and feel like we understand the idea or the image behind it, as we're looking for inspiration from the muses, from the gods. And when we find inspiration, maybe we'll find recognition in public life. All right, moving on here. Vive septem, vive memor mortis fugit hora, Perseus. Live mindful of death, flee the hour. Well, that's a nice one there. So write that one down. So live mindful of death. Fell. If I can type here. Flee the hour. All right. Live mindful of death. Flee the hour. So live, vive. Mindful, memor. So remember, if you see the words in italics, that's the translation. These are derivatives or words in English that come from it. So I should have mentioned that earlier. But it's the words in italics that give us a translation. So live mindful of death, mortis. That is third declension. So third declension, genitive singular is is. Mortality, mortuary. Live mindful of death. And then flee, fugit, tempus fugit, like a fugitive. Or I guess in this case it means the hour flees. So I misread that a little bit here. in my exuberance. So let me change that here. The hour, in fact, is, I'm going to change it. Remember, Latin doesn't distinguish between simple present and present continuous or progressive. So fugit ora could mean the hour is fleeting or the hour flees. So you just decide stylistically which one works for you. So I like that one. That's a nice one. All right, we'll do just a couple more. Generally, as a rule, we'll do just around 10 from the Sententia Antiquae. So here we have one of Horace. Rapite amici occasium de ora. Rapite, to snatch, to seize. Take the occasion of the hour, my friends. Of course, Horace elsewhere said, Carpe diem, seize the day. So, seize the occasion of the hour, or I guess they want to use opportunity. Seize the opportunity of the hour, my friends. So, seize the opportunity of the hour, my friends. Do they have an exclamation point here? No. So, although you could, since it is in the imperative, but we'll take it off here. All right, so that one's fairly straightforward. We're getting a little rhythm here. Seize, rapite. Again, if we're not sure, we get out our Whitaker's words. A lot of life is just slowing it down. You want to be a researcher, you got to slow things down here. So rapite, R-A-P-I-T, present, active, imperative, second person plural. Once again, drag offs, destroy, pillage, they don't really make any sense. So seize. So that is one of the challenges, is you're going to have to trust your intuitions in terms of which one fits the context. So just because Latin doesn't have the vocab that English does. Okay. So seize the opportunity. Notice that opportunity is third declension, accusative singular, just like the first one, ending in em. So remember earlier we had cupiditatem, telling us it's third declension, accusative singular, direct object. And then of the hour, fairly straightforward. Cicero, few come to old age. Few come to old age. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, he wrote a famous essay, De Senectute. Alas, most people remain immature their entire lives. The famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, in his famous essay of 1784, Was ist Aufklärung? So, die Aufklärung ist der Ausgang des Menschen aus seiner selbstverschuldeten Unmündigkeit. Enlightenment is the emergence of man from his self-imposed immaturity. The founding fathers of our country were heavily, they were old, wise men. There's no other way to put it. And they were wondering if our young republic could produce enough reason and morality so that a democracy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness could indeed be realized. Cicero was not quite the egalitarian that the founders were, but he certainly had republican ideas. But of course, it was only amenable, according to him, for few. All right, so few, pauci, come to old age, but again, old age in terms of wisdom, maturity. Fairly straightforward. Again, if you look up these words, you'll be in agreement. Decem, sed fugit inter rea fugit tempus. Virgil, great writer, 70 BC to 19 BC, writer of the Aeneid, among other things, the great epic, literary epic of Romans and Latin. So, but flee. Meanwhile, time flees. So This one is a little bit unclear. That's why there's not a lot of Virgil in the Wheelocks Latin. I'm doing actually an AP Latin right now with the young lady whose Latin is really good because she's been studying it many, many years. And it's like anything else, you take it up when you're a child, you tend to be pretty good at it. But Virgil is really tricky to translate. And so, but that's what it says. Time, so you might maybe you can change the word order. So time flees, meanwhile, but he flees. So that doesn't make any sense either. So we'll keep it here. But he flees. So you might even say, but while he is fleeing, meanwhile, time flees. But again, even that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I cannot recall the context of this, so I'm going to keep it literal. But he flees, meanwhile, time flees. So, but he flees, probably talking about Aeneas. Meanwhile, time flees. All right, so let's take a look here. The fates will find a way. Ooh, that's a nice one. I'm not going to write that down, but the fates will find a way. Nature makes a good man who is not ordinary, is sort of how that one works. All right, so take a look at that, and hopefully you feel comfortable with that. Again, I think the main thing is for you to look up words by pausing the video and making sure that you feel comfortable with those translations. All right, we're going to move on to the larger passage, or the longer passage, by Cicero de Amicitia on friendship, which he published in 44 BC. A great book on friendship. Of course, Plato wrote a short treatise on friendship. Aristotle, significantly more reflections. Emerson, in our own literary tradition, wrote an essay on friendship, and many others. But Cicero's is right up there. And remember, they do give you some vocab here, as well as, remember on the test, you're going to have to write a short essay response about some sentence or some meaning of the Latin. So this is good to consider because you might see this on the test. Nihil cum amicitia possum comparare, de hominibus nihil melius dant. Pecuniam alii malunt, alii corpora sana, alii famam gloriamque, alii voluptatis, sed hi viri nimium errant, quoniam illa sunt incerta et ex fortunae veniunt. Non ex sapientiae amicitia enum ex sapientiae et amore et moribus bonis et virtute venit. Sine virtute amicitia non potes esse, si nullos amicos habes, habes vitam tyranni, si invenies amicum verum, vita tua erit beata. If you find a true friend, your life will be happy. All right, so let me go over this one right here. Nothing with friendship I am able to compare. So you might want to change the word order. And so we'll call this De Amicitia, which was actually the title of the original essay. So I am, or I if I could type, I am able to compare nothing with friendship. Now you may want to change the word order, or you can even say I can, but let me just try to explain this again. So I am able, or I can compare nothing with friendship. And so, again, you may have a different word order, but I am able to compare, I can compare nothing with friendship. The gods, so the DE is gods. So again, if we're not sure, we look it up. Of course, Deus is God, but then this is the gods. because it is in the nominative plural. And it ends with the letter I, which is second declension nominative plural, so DI. The gods give nothing better to human beings. So let me write that out here. The gods give nothing better to human beings. The gods, D, give, dant, we had in chapter 1, nothing, nihil, melios, where we get words like ameliorative, amelioration, which means to improve. And then two human beings, if I want to say two men, that's fine too. But of course, that is third declension dative plural. Is ibus, is ibus. So remember, the dative is to or for whom something is done. Homo sapiens. Okay. Some prefer money, others a healthy body, others fame and glory. So notice how this verb sort of is implied in these other clauses. So some prefer, because malunt means to prefer. I think they glossed that for you. Yeah, so they give you that right here. So some prefer money. I'm going to write that out here. Some prefer money. By the way, last semester, some of you asked, what's the best way to study? Well, one of the disadvantages of this format is if you're just sitting there listening to the video, obviously that's a good thing. But if you're not writing it down, then that's not good in the sense that you're not active. And so that's the big challenge in learning is sometimes we overly intellectualize it, especially at the university level. You still got to do it. In other words, I'm writing it down for you, but what I'm doing is what you need to be doing. As some of you know, I teach younger students, high school students, God bless their souls. And if they would just do what Dr. Thomas does, things would be a lot easier. But we all have to learn our own ways. Yeah? Okay, so take a look at that there. So some prefer money, and then others a healthy body. So others a healthy body. Now you could potentially just say others health, but literally corporeal, or we're going to word body like corpse. So a healthy, like sanitary, a healthy body. Others, in other words, others prefer fame and glory, and we saw earlier how that may not be ideal for a republic of virtue. So others, fame and glory. Oops. Fame and glory. So that repeats a little bit of the vocab that we had earlier, so that helps. So others, fame and glory. Others, pleasure. So this is where we get words like voluptuousness. So others, pleasure. Others' pleasure, but these men err excessively. In other words, they're totally wrong. So, but these men, viri, err, like E-R-R-O-R, excessively. But these men err excessively. So, nemio means excessively, or you could also translate it as too much. Since, got a long sentence here, since those things are uncertain, in other words, that we really don't have as much control as we would like to think over our health. Are we destined for fame? Well, Andy Warhol, 15 minutes of fame. Not everybody's going to be a movie star. Power and glory, that doesn't seem open to many. Even making a lot of money, is not everybody's going to achieve that. So that's sort of what he means here. But since those things are uncertain and they come from chance, literally fortune. So what he's saying here, of course, is we can choose our friends by will, but these other things in life seem to be beyond human control. Since those things are uncertain, Since those things are uncertain. Since those things are uncertain and come from chance. And come from chance. Literally from fortune, fortuna. Still, I keep wanting to put end punctuation, but it keeps going here. And not from wisdom. And not from wisdom. So sapientia, Homo sapiens is wisdom. Notice that X is always followed by the ablative. So first declension ablative singular is the letter A with the macron. So sapientiae tells us it is the ablative of separation. Or just ablative, it means from. Remember, ablative generally is from. Is one of your or with. So from and with will help you with translating the ablative. For friendship comes, so notice our verb is all the way at the end here. So this is, I don't think we've had quite this location of the verb before. As you know, Latin likes to put the verb at the end. English in the second position, so we have to track the verb. So this is a good practice. There's the verb all the way at the end. For friendship comes from wisdom. So let's write that down there. For friendship comes from wisdom. For friendship comes from wisdom and from love. And so let me put that right here, then I'll explain it here. And from love, amore. And from love. And then it says moribus bonis. That means literally from the customs of good people. But in this case, it could mean from men of good character and virtue. So this one's a little bit tricky because they're all in the ablative. Let's see if they give us a little bit of help how to translate that. They do not. That's fine. But this is where we get words like mores or customs. And then, of course, bonis means good. So I'm going to say, and from love and men of good character and virtue. And men of good character and virtue. So since those things are uncertain and come from chance and not from wisdom, for friendship comes from wisdom and from love and men of good character and virtue. So again, looking up some of these words, let's see what we got here for moribus. So I said good character, so that's where I'm getting it right here. So good character or good morals, if you wanted to say that as well. All right, so without virtue, friendship is not able to be. So without virtue, friendship is not able to be. Notice we might say exist in English. As we said earlier, virtue and piety, two very important values for the ancient Romans. And dignity, dignitas. Caesar talks a lot about that. So dignity, virtue, piety, arguably the three most important virtues of the Roman character. If you do not have any friends, so habes is second person singular because it ends in S. So again, this is introduced again at the beginning of this chapter. So if you have no friends, if you have no friends, you have the life of a tyrant. You have the life of a tyrant. Now, what does that even mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things here, but sadly, a lot of people don't have friends, let's be honest. And if we don't have friends, obviously we're going to spend a lot of time, not to flog the horse again, but people are going to spend excessive amounts of time online because they're looking for friends or attention or recognition because they don't have it in their real lives. And so people generally are going to live a life of conformity and be yes men. And that's sort of what I'm saying here. So instead of living inwardly, outwardly, people who don't have friends tend to live outwardly, inwardly. Again, very complex, this idea, but that is perhaps the sense of it. If you find a true friend, your life will be happy. What is the punctuation on this? Oh, it's another semicolon. If you find a true friend, your life will be happy. If you find a true friend, si invenies amicum verum. Notice amicum verum is second declension accusative singular. Inveniis, again, just to show you there's no substitute for hard work or just doing something. Here they have the future. If you want to say if you will find a true friend, but if already indicates future in English grammar. So if you find a true friend, your life will be happy. So your life will be happy. Erit is the irregular form of to be of future. So your life will be happy. Interestingly enough, beata could mean happy. It could mean blessed. But I think in Cicero's context, it's less religious or Christian and more Roman. So we're going to say happy in that sense. All right, so that was it. So as always, you can email me if you have questions. Come to one of my German classes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and ask questions in person. Sometimes that's a lot easier. In fact, sometimes it often is. So, but welcome to Latin 102, and hopefully you enjoy Latin. I think Latin is kind of interesting. Little confession, Latin. I took up Latin later in life, and I can't say it's a language that is related to my research or the current book I'm working on, but I find it a good intellectual exercise. The language is at least somewhat inspiring or thoughtful, and which is always nice. So it gets us thinking. And there's worse things that we can do in life than learn Latin. All right, so enjoy, and I will be sending you another video on chapter 11 next week. Valete omnes.